Okay, so we're coming up to Pesach, and Pesach is all about freedom. So the question is, what is freedom, and how do we get free? And the deeper question really is, how do you become a slave? And if you understand how to become a slave, then you understand how to become free. There's a very interesting thing I saw, like a documentary on television. Till today, and there's actually slavery in generational slavery in India. India has a very strong caste system. So people are born into a certain class. I don't know exactly how it functions, and it's still functioning, I think. And it's like, that's it. They're garbage cleaners. That's it. That's your job, to be the garbage cleaner. And so in such a system, in fact, like a famous thing from Maria Antoinette, when they were rebelling in France, and she said, "Why are they rebelling?" So they said they don't have bread to eat. She said, "So let them eat cake, right?" So in her mind, she's the queen, and they're the peasants, and what they eat doesn't really matter. But her reality of being the queen, and sometimes this went on for hundreds of years, right? The Romanov family were the kings, the czars of Russia for hundreds of years. And so and they had a line: "What's given by God cannot be taken by man." In other words, there was a perception that this is something that God desired. The Romanov family are the kings of Russia, and fine. So, and people have to behave in certain ways. So this is really, in a way, one of the very important steps of freedom. And this is really what the Rebbe worked for, which was that a Jew is not subject to any of these basically crazy ideas. Because these ideas are very powerful. For example, what is slavery in Egypt? It is the idea that there is a king, Pharaoh, and he gets to tell me what to do. And that is the essence of slavery. The essence of slavery is somebody else gets to tell me what to do. And the Rebbe very much rejected this idea. And of course, the idea, in a certain sense, America had a lot to do with getting rid of that idea, because it's so ingrained in people that till this very day we have countries that are run by kings, and it's not even a question by the people. They don't question, like, why does the king get to tell me what to do? And maybe I should tell the king what to do. So the point is, they don't even have this question, because the way the country, the way the society functions is there is a king, and he is the one that gets to tell everybody what to do. So if a person buys into this reality, then what will happen is they will basically become a slave. And this reality, that's why the first thing that Hashem said to Avraham Avinu was Lech Lecha. Go to your real self, to your infinite self. In order to go to your infinite self, you have to get out of your finite self. You can't be, and ironically, a person can even be a slave to themselves, right? So a person who's, let's say, a drug addict is also a slave. He's a slave to his body. And that's why Hashem said, you have to leave Me'artzecha, your land, Me'latetecha, your birthplace, Beis Avicha, Me'artzecha, refers to like your country. One of the things that a little child, like we said the other day, that based on the spy that defected from the West, so Russia knows that basically to corrupt the country, it takes 20 years. Why? Because you have to get into the education system. You have to get into the minds of the children. Because once a child thinks something, it's almost impossible. Even myself, right? I grew up in America, and I grew up with the notion of democracy. Democracy was holy, right? But the truth is, democracy is not holy. I mean, it may be, as Churchill says, democracy is the best form of the evil called government. So it may be, no question, if you had to look at all the secular types of government, democracy is the best, no question. But it's certainly not the best government. Best government, of course, is Mashiach Tzidkenu, where you have, we see this clearly in all of history. When were people functioning the best? When you had a king established by God, and he was also more like a rebel leader, like Moses, or when the Jews follow the prophets, or even a community that follows the Rebbe. So then, because Hashem is leading the show, then everything works nicely. But any human system obviously has flaws. There's no question that, ironically, you could even say there's some kind of benefits of a dictatorship over a democracy. Some of the things that you can say is that a dictatorship can move quicker, right? So let's say China sees that there's a problem in its society. They have an ability in one day to change the problem. In America, you'd have to go through the Congress and the Senate. And even if you wanted to get things done, the difficulty of getting things done is so great that it's almost like this massive, boat that's going in a direction, and to change that boat takes almost everybody to start oaring differently. So it's a whole massive system. So it has its benefits, no question about it. Generally speaking, democracies have a little bit more freedom and they have more human rights, because ultimately the people in charge need to get reelected, whereas the people in charge of a dictatorship, they don't need to get reelected. So it's very easy for them. I remember I asked the great rabbi how a real Sharon could take how could he take the Jew? I mean, basically, he kicked people out of their homes in Gush Katif. You were here then, you remember. It's, the most barbaric thing you can do. So he told me a great line. He said, the challenge of power is sensitivity. So when a person becomes powerful, even a parent, a child, it could be, you have to remain sensitive. And it's very easy to become insensitive because it's the ego just wants to get its way. So the human being has a ability to, it's by Shem today. So it's very beautiful because I saw a teacher with his kids, and it was just beautiful to see the interaction, that there was the teacher was very much on the level of the kids, and the kids were very much connecting to him on that level. So often you'll see what we call a generation gap, but it's only because nobody's speaking to the children at their level. But if a person's sensitive, like the Rebbe, to the needs of every person, it's a beautiful story Rabbi Jacobson tells that there was once a child, that this child was a 2-year-old kid, and he sees his father writing a letter. So he says to his father, "What are you doing?" So his father says, "I'm writing to the Rebbe." So the kid says, he's 2, "Can I write to the Rebbe also?" So the father says, "Of course you can write to the Rebbe." So what does he do? He takes out his crayons, and he scribbles a paper, and he tells his father to go send this to the Rebbe. So what happened was that the father didn't know what to do. Do I send the scribble to the Rebbe or not? So he says, "I'm sorry, my son wanted me to send a letter, send the scribble." And the Rebbe wrote back, "Tell your son, Hapan Niskabel." Hapan means the pigeon nefesh. This request for his soul was accepted. In other words, the Rebbe realized that this kid was real, and the Rebbe didn't take kids for granted. The Rebbe loved kids. Anybody that's a real leader loves children, because they see that the child is a real person. They have genuineness. It's a very real thing. So, getting back to the subject at hand, to be free, you have to be able to leave your own self. If you're determined, right, the very famous thing of a human being, it says in the Kabbalah that there are 3 leaders, 3 things that run a human being: the mind, the heart, and the liver. The mind is obviously your thought process and what you think you should do. The liver is the ego, like Pharaoh. He couldn't get outside of his own ego. And then the heart is the emotions and the instincts, the desires. And so we know that is moyach, lev, and kavod. So if your mind is controlling your heart and your kavod, that is actually a melech, a king. And a king has control. On the flip side, if the heart is controlling the mind and the kavod, that is called a lemech, a clown. What is a clown? A clown is there, but it's just out of control. And then you have, last but not least, if the kavod right? Kavod is also from the word honor. If honor is controlling you, then you have chaf lamed mem, and that spells klum, nothing. So it's a very real thing. Somebody once told the president of a synagogue that everybody hated, and he was just, everybody despised him. So he said, a friend of his said, "What do you need this for? Why don't you just resign?" He says, "And kavod for you is nothing. Honor for you means nothing." So there's a human instinct, and instincts are irrational to have supremacy, to be important. And the truth is it's nothing. Why? Because our sages teach us that who is honorable? The person who runs away from honor. Who do we really honor? Not the person who has a big position or is president of a company. Only a foolish person honors them. A person who runs away from honor, in fact, a person who honors others, that person is honorable. So the person who's getting honor is not really honorable. The person who's giving honor is honorable. And this is what kind of the immature people or immature minds, they look at somebody, let's say, and this is really the sin of the Eitz Hadas, which was that Adam looked into what's called the Madar HaKlippos, the location of Klippa. And what is the Klippa? Klippa is this arrogance. And he saw it and he was attracted. It looks good. Like you found Obama. It's just unbelievable how 27% of the country became his cult members. Why? Because he looks good. Hitler also, he looked good. But the truth is that they were just delusional. They have nothing to offer anyone. All they have is their own delusions of grandeur and their own gripes and hatred. Like I said before, that the Britain sent a spy or a diplomat to figure out who is this Hitler guy. So he came back. He said he's run by hate. That's what's running him. So that's all he was. He was. Everybody has a body and a spirit, and his spirit was negative, and that was it. That was the whole story. But if a person's not discerning, they don't have a cup, they don't have a brain, or they don't have experience, they look at it, wow, this guy's so confident. Meanwhile, it's not even him. It's not his own mind talking. It's an emotion where somebody comes and he says, whatever, con man, I'm going to help you, I'm going to give you this money. And the whole thing's not true. The whole thing is fake. And they fool people because the guy himself operates under his own delusion. So the person is completely delusional, and it's complete. And so the person that looks at him doesn't look at somebody that looks delusional. They look at a rational person, but the person is not rational. And that's the first step in freedom. The first step in freedom is knowing that people, generally speaking, I would say, are 90 to 99.9% not rational. And once you understand that people are not rational, you can understand, like, as long as you look, and this is a big problem of the leftist cult, is as long as you think that what you're looking at is true, then it captures you. This guy wrote a book, very interesting book. The early 1900s, there were 1 million Yidden living in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. There were 17 Yiddish newspapers. So there was a Gentile that wrote a book. He was a reporter, and there was a guy that he was kind of the editor of the Forward, was also a Yiddish newspaper, and he took him around. So you can imagine the perspective from an American. You're an American, and suddenly there's 1 million people speak Yiddish in the Lower East Side of Manhattan with the complete culture, kosher food, of this and that. So it was a fascinating book. It was like what we would call a sociological book analyzing these Yidden. And it didn't come from an anti-Semitic place at all. It was just from a place of curiosity. It's very, very interesting. One of the points he says there was a very profound point. He says a Jew will never become a Christian. Why? Because the whole thing is an antithesis. Has 1,000 years of bad experiences. The whole thing doesn't make sense to him. Never become a Christian. But what he is vulnerable for is a secular intellectual idea. Very profound what this guy said. And we see this very clearly, that the left, in fact, communism was born by a Jew. The main adherents of communism were Jews, right? Next case, you have the situation that in America today, a lot of the left are Jews. And again, they are people that, I said it the other day, there's a line, a liberal is a white man that hasn't been stabbed. In other words, people that don't have experience in life, I said this before, that the KGB calls Americans, even though I don't fully agree with it, unfrightened fools. But there's a certain truth to that if you don't have experience, you don't know that there's danger, so the heart by nature just wants to love everybody. Because love is a very good emotion. The hippies were into love. And part of it is true. Love is, loving your fellow as yourself is the most important mitzvah. But there's a very big difference between the Torah's mitzvah and the hippies' mitzvah. Why? Oh, Adam, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. No problem. I hope you have a note. Good to see you. All right. How you feeling? Good. So we're just talking about the difference between hippie love and real love. So the Torah tells us that we should. The Torah tells us that we should love your fellow Jew as yourself. In fact, the Baal Shem says you have to be ready, and they really were ready, to give your life for a Jew you never met. So the question is, what's the difference between a hippie that says, hey, it's all art, it's all love, it's all beautiful? So the answer is, first of all, I have a friend that was a hippie. He was looking for the truth. He became a Lubavitcher. He says, I noticed by the hippies that they're full of love until you sit under a hammock. If you're sitting under a hammock, they're not so loving anymore. That's my hammock. In other words, there's an emotion that desires love. But if you run by emotions, you could also have a situation that you like. What is it? By the way, I was teaching these kids yesterday. Sometimes you're teaching, Hashem helps the words you say. And words are amazing, because if you get the right definition of something, it's extraordinary. It's like opens up an entire understanding. So I told the kids that all of the emotions, maybe because I was talking to kids, you had to lower it down. All the emotions, in fact, it says in Chassidus, sometimes when you're talking, it brings from the source of speech, which is even higher than the letters themselves. But all of love is one thing, really. It's something that I want. So that's why it's so broad. When you say I love something, it could be anything, because it's something that I want. It could be a person, but the one thing that it has in common is something I want. And when you fear something, it's something that you don't want. It's just that simple. Everything that anybody, man, human, animal, and maybe even God, does is based on something you want and something you don't want. And that mixture is what we have to get right. Figuring out what is worth wanting and what is worth not wanting. Because sometimes not wanting something, ironically, is also a want. You want to not have this problem. So you go in the direction of the not want. A friend of mine, unfortunately passed away, an older man that came to our shul. So he said that when you start learning how to ride a motorcycle, they say wherever you're going to look is where you're going to go. He says it's true. I was once looking at a pole, and that's where I went. So ironically, when you're looking at the problem, you're actually going to the problem. I have a sister that's very clever. She once said, when you have a problem, you have to think of a different solution. Because often you're looking at it, you see the problem, but if you think of a different solution, because if you only think this is the solution, then this is the problem. But if you think of a different solution, you get around it. Yeah, think outside the box. So, in any event, just to wrap it up and go back to the beginning, we're talking about freedom. It's a very, very, very important subject. What is it to be free? And we said in order to be free, you have to understand what it is to be a slave. To be a slave means you're under the control of someone or something else. I remember a person that came out of addiction, for some time he came out of addiction. It was Passover. He said, I really feel free. I was a slave to this substance. So any time you have, and today, by the way, this thing is a very big, I have a friend, a very big psychiatrist, who says it's very addictive. It's an addiction. Why? One of the things he said, we did this kind of protocol on how to live well. So he said that never feel obligated to answer someone's text. Very important thing, because we're under the stress of having to reply. Imagine when we didn't have, Shabbos. Shabbos feels like you're free, right? In today they have this thing of a 24-hour technology detox, and they have this thing which is another thing which is on the phones these days. They have these things how to limit your usage, because everybody knows. I mean, you can't be a human being and always be worried about anything. I mean, before, okay, the guy had to call you. You picked up the phone. People are so, in a way, they don't realize it, but they have a low-level stress of always having to reply, always having to answer. So on my own personal level, I'm not saying that I mastered it, but I went off even my big family WhatsApp groups, because every time you see it, it distracts your mind. You're not in control anymore, because you are really your mind and your decisions. And if you're not making the decisions for your life, then you're a slave. Of course, the only exception to that is following Hashem. That's the slavery that you want, because in life, you have to be a slave to someone. There's no way you can't make decisions. The only question is, who is the master? So either the master is your own mind and Hashem's guidance. Hashem doesn't force you, but He's giving you guidance. So you're using truth and wisdom. Or you're enslaving yourself, as many people do, to other people. They're afraid. What don't they want? They don't want criticism. So they become a slave to criticism. And that's a terrible slavery. Why? Because anybody can criticize you. I lived in South Africa. In different societies, in Japan, they have a unique anxiety around people. Because if people are abusive, or they verbally abusive in the way you don't do what they want and they'll shame you, so then the person can start becoming kind of neurotic around people. And you're always worried about people. But the truth is, nobody has the right to shame somebody else. No one has the right to force someone else. The only people that you can say have a right is maybe a teacher or a parent. Certain circumstances. But no one has the right to force anyone into anything. Even a wife. So the point is, and a husband as well. We don't have the right. Okay, it's a grown-up. You have to speak with respect. You have to create agreements. So if a person understands that's one of the great benefits of America, or what used to be America, and that was the belief that I have the right to make my own choices in life. That's why many societies, German societies, they're very, very messed up. They're messed up societies. Why? Because the people are very malicious in how they educate. So people, you'll see it even here, Germans come, they're very orderly. They can't handle anything outside of the box. Why? Because that's how they've been educated as a youth, like boom, 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 boom. And so they become very afraid of stepping outside of the box. And it's a mental, I wouldn't say a mental, it's more an emotional illness. And many, many people have it. Probably most of the world has it in a way. So the only way to live free is to kind of empty out all the noise from your box. Close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath and breathe in Hashem, and breathe out all your fears. And do it again. You breathe in Hashem. You breathe out all your fears. Once more, you breathe in Hashem. You breathe out all your fears. And then say to yourself, inside my mind, the only master is Hashem and my decisions. Again, inside my mind, the only master is Hashem and my decisions. Inside my mind, the only master is Hashem and my decisions. And once you do that, you restore the truth, that is the person that's meant to run you. Now somebody else is meant to run them. And that's why the Rebbe was a real example. It's true somebody might not be behaving properly or whatever, but it's not your job to force them. Maybe if it's a little child, of course it is. But your job is to inspire them. If you can inspire them, good. If you can't inspire them, you know what? You also have some faults, and you don't want them to shame you, and you don't shame them either. And this is what we see. People don't realize how the modern world, became so messed up. And it really came from Obama. Why? Because Obama introduced into the Western discourse one thing which wasn't there before, which is demeaning, shaming, making fun of. In fact, the reason Trump became president was because there was a meeting. I actually saw some of it. It was like a gathering. We saw it. And he humiliated Trump terribly. It was very, very rude, very mean what he did. And he found it funny. Like, it's funny. It's like this arrogant pig standing up there humiliating another human being. And that's kind of a typical, narcissist and a racist against, whites and other people, and a sick person. And when Trump, after that thing, Trump said, "I will be the next president." And Trump, whatever you say about him, he's a very hard worker. Guy gets up at 3, he doesn't stop. And there was a time in my life that I also had that capacity. Anything I set my mind to, I could do. You have to be in a certain state of being. Very, very, you have certain people, it's like a state of consciousness. I'm not really there now. Maybe it's good or bad, I don't know. But the bottom line is that there was a time in my life, if I wanted to be the president and I was serious, I could have been the president. Meaning the drive within and the focus was so, Israelis have that a lot. They're very focused, If a person has that kind of a focus, there's almost nothing, because nothing can stand in the way of will. So the point is that ultimately, that itself is a problem, because what's the first halacha of the Torah? Which is, don't worry about what someone else will say. So the Rebbe was very into this. A human being has to be driven by their convictions, what is right and what's wrong. And if someone doesn't like it, that's their problem. I'm not disturbing you, and you're not going to disturb me. And so the trick of life is not to get into a place where you disassociate from people, but on the contrary. And this is the difference between kind of puppy love and real love. Real love is that Shem tells me to love this person. It's not my emotional, what I'm looking for myself, how I feel. It's rather what Hashem wants from me. And when a person understands that, they're also balanced in their love, because love has to be balanced with gevura, with strength. And only when we balance love and strength, which the strength is that I have to make the right decisions, there's a moral obligation, and there's Hashem. And then the love is a love of choice. I choose to love. And in fact, what's more important in a marriage? Commitment or love? The whole Western thing is about love, but it doesn't work. The olden days, it was about commitment. It wasn't about love, but it worked. So we see that commitment is much stronger. Like, if I think even in my own marriage, I would much rather be a committed person than a loving person. Love is nice, but commitment's going to keep it going. And so that's why the number one way to be free is to understand that nobody has a right to tell you what to do. But that includes your own body, your own instincts. And the only one that doesn't only have a right but has an obligation to be the master is your own choices, your rational thinking, and ultimately Hashem himself, who is the only real rationality, because within ourselves we are also a little bit irrational. We can never be sure if what we're saying is 100% true, because we have the Yetzer Hara within us. So if we get to that stage of life where we understand that a human being by nature, that's everybody, is in some degree of irrationality. So I'm going to listen to someone else who's irrational. I myself is a little irrational. I have to listen to your mishigas. I've got my own mishigas. So number one, we got to start in that way. In fact, you do see that with Israelis, a certain strength. Hey, whatever, I have my opinion. Sometimes it can be too much. But also the opposite is also not good. If you don't have a certain strength in your own convictions, then anybody can tell you what to do. So a person has to have the notion that, and again with the phone, we have to be very careful with the phone, definitely with the media. Nobody should be looking at the media. But with the phone, a person has to know you don't have to answer a text. I was driving back just this morning, And this lady, whatever, I borrowed her car. So 9:30, I'm driving, I'm texting her, I'm coming, whatever. But and actually I tried to call and she declined the call because whatever she. So what does that mean? It means I wasn't meant to speak to her then. It was meant to be a normal human being. Park the car. It's 2 minutes late. It's okay. Everybody can wait 2 minutes. I have a friend, very special guy. They run a company, very big company, and they deal with investors. You can imagine 300 clients, high wealth individuals, taking care of the money. They have to deal with this. So this boy, he's a young man, he says, 5 minutes saves the world. Meaning, if a guy's called and he's stressed, take 5 minutes off. He takes it, let me think about it. And he listens to what Hashem has to say, and he deals with it. A very calm guy, right? This is talking about a guy that's got like literally hundreds of millions of other people's money, which is even worse than your own, on his bank. But he's calm because 5 minutes saves the world. And that's the kind of life that we have to live. 5 minutes saves the world. That we can not have to answer the call, not have to do these things. We were saying yesterday, the Rebbe says when we learn Torah, it has to be like Shabbos. Nothing exists right now. If it was Shabbos, I wouldn't answer the call, right? The person could be calling me for 10 hours straight. I wouldn't answer the call. And the same thing is, if it's my time, I'm going to do it my time. It's very important, especially in Tzfat. We have to make a schedule. You have to know when to get up. I see if I get off my schedule, it's not good here. You got to keep a schedule here. I have to have a time when you get up, when you down. Everything has to be on a schedule. You're pretty good at a schedule. And then everything can fit. And the truth is to never break your schedule. Because if you break your schedule, you're off schedule. You can't function, especially. And it's fast as like an eight. You want it to be that you have freedom. But in the same time, you have to be your own master. So what is freedom? And this is a very important thing. I once heard this from Rabbi Friedman, who said that people, freedom is not running wild in the desert. That's what the Egyptians, the Arab wanted to do. Let's make a party. Moshe Rabbeinu is not here. But that's not freedom. That is chaos and anarchy, and that's what we're seeing with the crazy radicals. That's what they want. But it doesn't take long before there's, God forbid, they burnt the house down. As Netanyahu said yesterday, I don't know if you saw the speech, you saw a little bit, where he said, it was once an argument about a baby. And so one mother said the other one should take the baby, and the other one said cut it in half. He says, what's the difference between the two protesters on the right and the left? The left is saying, let's burn down the baby. So, in other words, that it's just chaos. It's just insanity. So what is sanity? What is real freedom? Is knowing what is right and what is wrong. What is right is that Hashem made us as intelligent people, as godly people, and that's what we have to do. And the wrong that exists in the world has to be recognized for being wrong. Because if you don't recognize the evil for being evil, if you don't recognize that what's going on, let's say, with the left is basically they're trying to be dictators. What's the difference between that and communism? Trying to impose their will on everybody else. That is not acceptable. Because nobody should do. The right says you have freedom to not be religious. So ironically, they can accuse the right of being intolerant. You're trying to impose a religion. It's the exact opposite. The right is saying, no, we're not saying what to do. But you are trying to impose your way of life on us. And that's not acceptable. And so it's a person is only free when they understand what is truth, which is Hashem, which is making good decisions, trying to grow. That's the truth. And everything else is only part of history. If it's a good part of history, it will remain. And if it's a bad part of history, just like Pharaoh, he was the king of the world. Guy was on top of his game. He had millions of Jews under slavery. And they were black magicians and everything. 1 year later, the whole country's gone. And we've seen this in history time and time again. Empires, big empires, they're gone. They just don't exist anymore. Rome, gone. England, gone. It's all gone. And it's all going to go because only the truth will remain. We have to recognize no matter how big these protests, all of this is just a passing phase, a stupid phase in history. There was communism. It's all going to go. It's all going to disappear. And the truth is Hashem, is Torah, is goodness, is kindness, and responsibility, and ethics, and morality. It only comes from Hashem. And that's what's going to remain. And so once a person understands this, then they don't worry about the negative. They just see the world as how much more positive can I do? Because it's only when the negative seems real to you. That's why kings made big palaces and they had big armies. just to make themselves look real. What do they say about fear? Fear is false evidence appearing real. Again, false evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. But if you understand that that evidence is false, it's not real. Everything in the media is not real. All these people that are on the left are just not, at least the ideas, they're not real. It's just insanity. It doesn't exist in reality. It's like a guy that comes and he says, listen, I got a new math. 2 plus 2 equals 20. Right? It's no difference. It's the same thing. And then eventually they'll realize that their math is off and Hashem is true, and we're going to be in the Beis HaMikdash this Pesach, and everybody will see for themselves, and they themselves will say, Baruch Hashem, we finally found the truth, because everybody's really looking for the truth, and in nature everybody's good. And so we bless each and every person that's here and that's not here, that wants to be here, that we should all be together with the truth, which is Hashem, which is the Torah, which every generation we have a Rebbe, and that we should be in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kodesh HaKadosh. There'll be no more questions. It'll be in front of our eyes. And the truth, what is the real truth, is that the Torah is true. The Torah gives us direction, and it also gives space for other people to grow. And that is the correct way. But ourselves, we have to be kings. We can't let ourselves loose. We can't let anyone, including our own bodies, control us. That is slavery. That is real. That's the only definition of slavery. And the definition of freedom is when we are enslaved to Hashem and to our own minds. We make the body a horse. I had a friend who was a horse trainer. So a horse starts off wild. You have to train it. Puppy, we all start off wild. We all have a wild ego in us. And then you have to train it. And myself, I can say that I didn't have great self-discipline. I came from America. It was very, everybody one thing I like about the Russians, you see, they're very disciplined people, right? To the credit, they bring up their people with a lot of these are the boundaries. And you do see that it's a credit. So I didn't have that, but as I needed to, as life forces you, because the world is not waiting for you to grow up, as you become more disciplined, you become better and better, so the dog eventually learns who's the master. And we can never let the dog get control. I remember I was once in Kansas City, my grandfather, wrote lessons in Tanya, so very special chassid. So he was 90 years old, and he asked me to arrange a minyan Friday night. Because we had a minyan Shabbos day. He asked me to arrange a minyan Friday night. So I didn't get my act together, unfortunately. But he was going to stay over Shabbos. It was a Wednesday. He left Kansas City. So he came to visit his son and his he left the city to go to another city to go to a minyan Friday night. You know what he told me? And he didn't say this with any arrogance. He says, I don't want my Yetzer Hara to get used to it. So here's a Jew of 90 years old who's literally davening. And we're not just talking of davening like maybe me and you, a guy that would daven on Shabbos 2 to maybe 3, maybe 4. He lived his life. You can say he's 90. He retire a little bit. You don't have a minyan. It's not like he's not going to daven. But he said, I don't want my Yetzer Hara to get used to it. So he knew that he was in a war at 90 and he was fighting. So we have to know, it's very important to know that we're in a war. Because the easiest way to lose a war is not to think that you're in it. And that's they say with a frog, that if you put a frog in hot water, but it's not hot initially, and you turn the water on, it doesn't realize, before it knows it, it gets boiled. And that's what the Yetzer Hara does. Before you know it, like the left and the crazy stuff that's going on, talking about in the history of the world and all the insanities that ever existed, there was never such a big insanity of telling children whether you're a male or female. It's never existed. It's unbelievable. So it's like quicksand. Once you fall in, so a person has to understand that the opposite side, to win the war, you have to understand there really is a war. And that war is within you and it's outside of you. It's in both places. And once you get that, then you could really you could be focused, knowing that you're always in a battle. You always have to grow. In fact, the battle is a good thing, because like we said the other day, the battle keeps us fighting, keeps us motivated, keeps us moving forward. So everything Hashem did is for the good. And I hate to say it, but without some of the craziness of the left, the right wouldn't be the right. They wouldn't say how important the right is. It's actually, in a way, it was a big favor of God. Because what it is, it woke up the right. The right was starting to lose its own mind. And then it said, no, this is too crazy. We can't be part of this. So I say, okay, what do we believe? started the process. Okay, well, there is a difference between, marriage and Torah and God, and not only Jews, Christians as well. It's a very good thing to have a biblical system. Obviously, the Noahide is the ultimate, but to have something is better than nothing. And so we know that Hashem is running the show, and everything is there just so we can make the right choices. And I'll conclude with something I thought this morning, that it all boils down to one thing, which is increasing positivity, right? Always be on the increase in the positive. The negative is always trying to make you sad, or it's fear. And it's bad. But the truth is that it's good, and our job is to make it even better. And it's literally that simple. And if you ask me yourself, you want to know truthfully, am I in the right space or the wrong space? You have to ask yourself, am I trying to make things better? Myself, others, am getting better in any way? Or am I stuck? Or am I afraid? Or am I negative? Because that is the dark side. But the side of trying to get better, that is, nobody can say, I know the 100% what I have to do. But that, at least you're in that direction. And as long as you're in that direction, you're in the right direction, Hashem's direction.